lifted 4 million people above the poverty line last year. And joining us to discuss this imminent vote is Republican Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland. Good afternoon, Mr. Harris.
Pleasure to be with you.
Congressman, you are a committed Catholic, and last year I noted that you gave the commencement address at the Chestertown Christian Academy, in which you said, and I'm quoting you, "We should never be ashamed of our religious heritage." Yet it seems, sir, as though the Church is now ashamed of you and your stance on food stamps. The US Bishops' Conference Committee has written to Congress condemning this vote, and I'm quoting them. They say, "How the House chooses to address our nation's hunger and nutrition programs will have profound human and moral consequences." In other words, sir, what you are doing is a direct contradiction of what you proudly proclaim as your religious heritage. Could you explain that?
Well, you know, what we're going to do today is we're going to take the food stamp program, which has doubled over the last 3 years, literally an increase of 100%, and say we're going to back it off 5% to fight waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, most Americans think, and I hope the Catholic bishops would agree with me, that there is waste, fraud, and abuse in the program, and that it's no one's responsibility to give taxpayer dollars to waste, fraud, and abuse.
The problem, sir, is this rhetoric that SNAP recipients are feckless fraudsters, that the whole system is being exploited by criminals, is simply untrue. According to the CBO, 3/4 of households receiving food stamps contain a child, an elderly person, or a disabled adult. And more than 80% of such households are working either in the year before or the year after they receive this benefit. This is essentially for the working poor. These people are not feckless freeloaders.
Sure, and we hope that all those individuals who qualify stay on the program, but you know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has said over 10% of the stores that take food stamps are engaged in waste, fraud, and abuse. Over 10%. So we can give all that benefit to the 95% of individuals, and there's more money left over for the people who truly need it if you root out the waste, fraud, and abuse, which we know is true. We know, every American believes, a program that big has waste, fraud, and abuse. We need to empower states to go after it, and that's what this bill does. I think Americans are going to agree that's reasonable. I hope everyone who thinks we should give more money to the people who need it agree that we should first eliminate all the waste, fraud, and abuse.
The problem, sir, is there are some very real health implications if you throw 5 million people off food stamps. Again, some facts. The Health Impact Project produced a study that says cuts to the program will lead to increases in a variety of diseases, and that diabetes alone could increase government and private sector health costs by $15 million over the next 10 years. Again, sir, I have to put it to you, you are hurting the vulnerable for the sake of beliefs that frankly have no basis in fact, because the volumes of people that will be hurt are just enormous.
Well, if people who and institutions like stores that are illegally trafficking in food stamps lose that ability, again, we want to preserve it for people who are in the program, who need it, who are truly needy.
What about those people? What about those people, sir, who are vulnerable, who are not fraudsters, people who are working in 2 jobs with 2 or 3 children, and whose very daily nutrition will be compromised when they are thrown off this program?
It won't be, because they won't be thrown off this program.
How will you discriminate? How will you discriminate?
We root out waste, fraud, and abuse. We empower states to root out the waste, fraud, and abuse.
How, sir, do you decide that someone's a fraudster? How do you decide that?
This is simple law. In Baltimore, just this week, they indicted 10 stores, $7 million of food stamp fraud in those 10 stores. We know there's a plain law, there's a plain way to know when people are committing fraud. If you're committing fraud, you're not going to receive the benefit, and if you need it, you will. All those women and children and the working poor are going to receive the benefit. They aren't affected at all by the Republican. This is not an across-the-board cut. This is surgical. This roots out waste, fraud, and abuse. And again, I hope everyone who thinks that we do need to help needy in this country, like I believe, believe that we ought to make sure that the money's going to those needy people, not to those 10 stores in Baltimore committing $7 million in fraud.
I understand, but sir, when you cut 10% or 5%...
It's 5%. It's not 10, it's 5.
I understand that, sir. But whatever the percentage, that doesn't stop the fraud.
Sure it does if you target those cuts toward people who are committing fraud, just as this bill does. Because you capture the people who are committing fraud, and hopefully, as we're doing in Baltimore, you bring them into a court of law and you indict them and you prosecute them. This discourages fraud, allowing more money to flow to the people who we all want to help. There's no one in the Republican side who doesn't believe that the food stamp program is important to get to those people who deserve it and need it. This bill doesn't touch them. This is not an across-the-board cut.
Congressman Andy Harris, thank you, sir, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Coming up, a brief and unexpected moment of clarity on America's prisons from the junior senator of Kentucky, no less.
And I think what a